Zelda's greatest heroes rarely get a statue. Some get an unmarked grave behind a headstone, a cursed storm, or a story nobody thinks to finish, because saving Hyrule has never once come with a promise that anyone will remember your name. That price shows up again and again in these tales, and by the end, one character finally breaks the pattern by refusing to need the credit at all. The Composer Brothers. Two men wrote the most beautiful music in Hyrule's history, and the kingdom buried them where almost nobody bothers to look. That's not a metaphor. Walk into Kakariko Graveyard in Ocarina of Time, and the tombs of Flat and Sharp sit off to the side. Plain gravestones with zero ceremony, nothing marking them as anything special. These were royal court composers. The guys who wrote the Sun Song, a literal hymn capable of bending day into night and night into day. That is not a small commission. That is the kind of song a kingdom throws a parade for. Instead, they got 2 headstones. You have to go out of your way to read. The obvious question is, what earns you a burial like that after writing the anthem that controls time itself? The game never spells it out. No dialogue box confirms a betrayal, no scroll accuses the royal family of turning on them. Nothing in canon says the crown discarded them, but follow the pattern anyway. Loyal servant writes something extraordinary, then gets reduced to a nameless plot beside the family they served. Flat and Sharp just happen to be the first ones in the series where you can literally find the bodies. And that's the version where things end quietly. Sharp doesn't get that mercy. In Majora's Mask, his ghost shows up again, this time in Akana Graveyard, and he is not resting. He has cut a deal with something evil, and that deal has trapped the whole graveyard in a storm that never stops, slowly killing everyone unlucky enough to live nearby. A composer who once wrote music to control the sun and moon spends his afterlife suffocating a village in his own grief. When Link finds him, Sharp doesn't want help. He rejects Link outright, locked into whatever bitterness sealed that pact in the first place. The only thing that breaks it is his dead brother's song, Flat, reaching him from beyond the grave when nothing else could. 2 brothers, remembered by almost nobody, and one of them turns that forgetting into a weapon against the living. But a forgotten grave is at least an ending. What's worse is being denied even that, being stuck waiting for a day that the whole world is scheduled to end before it can ever arrive. Anju and Kafei. A grown man gets turned into a child, loses his own wedding, and the game still calls this one of the good endings. That is not a joke. That is the actual best-case outcome for Kafei. The curse is not the tragic part. Losing 3 days he can never get back is the tragic part, and he loses them on a loop over and over every single time the cycle resets. Kafei was days from marrying Anju when Majora's Mask cursed him into a child's body, right before the thief Sakon stole the wedding mask and vanished with it into the night. Stripped of his adulthood, his face, and his wedding in a matter of hours. Anju does not know any of this. She only knows he is gone, and Termina has exactly 72 hours before the moon crushes it flat. Here is what she does with that information. Nothing and everything. While the rest of Clocktown packs up and runs for their lives, Anju stays behind at the Stockpot Inn, holding a private letter and a promise from a man who currently looks 9 years old. She has zero proof he is even alive. She waits anyway. If you play the quest exactly right, tracking Kafei through 3 separate days, storming Seiken's hideout in Akana Canyon to drag the stolen mask back out of the dark, you get a reward almost nobody sees. Link brings the mask back. Kafei and Anju meet in the inn's back room on the final day, exchange wedding masks in a ceremony meant for a crowd that will never come, and choose to stay together as the moon falls. 2 people, 1 tiny room, an entire town emptied out around them. Most players never trigger it. The quest is long, the timing is brutal, and the payoff is completely optional. Their wedding can happen in total silence, unwitnessed by the very save file that made it possible in the first place, and even that ending does not survive. Link resets the day to actually beat the game, which means their last moments together get wiped every single time. Nothing in the script says this outright, but follow the loop to its logical end. Somewhere in that pile of erased timelines is a version where they never even get the room. Their reward for surviving fear and a curse and a countdown is a moment of peace that Link is structurally required to delete. But at least they had each other to hold on to at the end. Imagine the opposite. A kid who had no one, whose loneliness got so big it tried to drop the moon on a world that never made room for him. The Skull Kid. The thing trying to crush an entire world under a falling moon is not a demon, not a warlord, not some ancient evil. It is a kid nobody wanted to sit with. That reframes everything. Termina spends 3 days staring at the sky in total terror of an entity that, underneath the mask, is just lonely and furious about it. The surface story is simple enough. Skull Kid causes trouble in Ocarina of Time, gets pushed further into Majora's Mask, and ends up wearing a cursed artifact he steals off a stranger. Cute little forest imp becomes Apocalypse Engine. That is the version everyone remembers. The version underneath is worse. His own dialogue in Ocarina of Time gives you the real diagnosis before the sequel even happens. He is not a child anymore, not accepted as one of the Kokiri, not accepted anywhere else either. He fears adults. He has, in his own words, lost his way. That is not a punchline. That is a kid describing exile. Before any of it, his only real friends were the four giants. They played with him, they made him feel like he existed to someone, then they grew into their roles as Termina's guardians and left, the way friends do when responsibilities show up, and the awkward kid gets quietly phased out of the group chat. He did not get a going away party. He got abandoned by the only beings who ever treated him like he mattered, and then he got left, holding all that hurt with nowhere to put it, so he put it into a mask, and the mask put it into a moon. The fan debate over whether Majora is a separate evil possessing him or just his own resentment given a face is still unresolved in canon, but follow what the game actually shows you. His flashback memories are not demon memories. They are a kid's memories, replayed and replayed, of being forgotten while the world moved on without him. Nothing in canon states outright that Majora is simply his own darkness wearing a mask, but the pattern makes the other reading feel like wishful thinking. When Link finally frees him, the giants show up and reaffirm the friendship. Nice moment. Except it arrives after countless loops of him suffering alone, invisible, erased from a world that used to let him play in it. The apology comes after the damage already got done 100 times over in a timeline nobody else remembers living through. That is the part that should sit with you longer than the moon does. This entire video keeps circling one prize, the promise that doing the right thing gets you remembered. Skull Kid is what happens when nobody bothers cashing that promise in early. He does not become a villain because he is evil. He becomes one because loneliness left unattended eventually looks for something to break, but someone had to hand that cursed power over in the first place and then chase it across worlds. What kind of person builds their entire life around one dangerous object and vanishes the second it's safe? The happy mask salesman. He hands you the quest that defines an entire game, and the game never once tells you his name. That is not a small oversight. Every other character in Termina gets a title, a role, a reason for existing. This man just appears, running a shop full of masks in Ocarina of Time, then resurfaces in Majora's Mask as the person who sends Link chasing a stolen artifact through 3 of the worst days imaginable. He says the mask is ancient. He says it is used in hexing rituals. He says he has been tracking it for years, and within minutes of finally getting close, Skull Kid rips it out of his hands and vanishes into the night. Years of pursuit, gone in seconds. Watch him carefully, and the mask stops being a prop and starts being the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. When it is missing, he is unhinged, gripped by something closer to terror than anger, warning Link about a terrible fate with a calm that somehow makes it worse. When it is nearby, he is polite, composed, almost pleasant. Flip a coin on which version answers the door. The man does not have moods. He has a single variable, and that variable is the mask's safety. Then there is the matter of how he moves. He is standing in the clock tower before the story even begins, watching. He appears in rooms with no visible entrance. His hands land on Link's shoulders like he teleported the last 3 feet. Players have documented these moments for over 20 years, and nobody has landed on an explanation because the game never gives one. He does not walk like someone who belongs to Termina. He drifts through it like a tourist who forgot to leave, and once the mask is finally purified, he does the strangest thing in the entire game. He takes it back. He remarks almost offhand that it is no longer evil, and he leaves. No thanks, no explanation. No mention of what he plans to do next, or where he came from, or why a shopkeeper from one kingdom is haunting the border of another dimension, chasing a cursed relic like it owes him money. Nothing in canon says this outright, but follow the pattern he leaves behind. A man with no home shown, no family mentioned, no life outside the object he is hunting, who exists in the story only for as long as the mask is in danger. It reads like someone who traded every ordinary attachment, a house, a friend, maybe the parts of himself that made him human, for the singular purpose of chasing something cursed across worlds. The theory is thin because the game wants it thin. He is not written to be understood. He is written to vanish the moment his purpose ends, which is exactly what he does. Nobody erased this man. He erased himself, piece by piece, until the mission was the only piece left. But at least he chose his obsession. What happens when the obsession is your own child, when you push the one person who could save the world so hard that you break them, and only realize it as a ghost? King Rome. He built the weapons that ended his own kingdom, and he did it on purpose, convinced he was saving it. That's not a twist. That's the plan, working exactly as designed right up until it wasn't. King Rome Bosphorus Hyrule spends most of Breath of the Wild disguised as a nameless old man on a cliff, and most players clock him as a wise mentor archetype before they ever learn his name. That reading dies the moment his diary shows up. The surface story is simple. 100 years before the game begins, Rome reactivates the Guardians and the Divine Beasts, ancient Sheikah machines built to fight back a returning evil. He's the king who prepared. He's the king who saw the calamity coming and armed Hyrule against it. Then Calamity Ganon seizes every last one of those machines and turns them into the instrument of the kingdom's destruction, and the castle falls with the king still inside it. But the diary and Zelda's own memories tell a second story running underneath the first one. Rome doesn't comfort his daughter as she struggles to awaken her sealing power. He pressures her. He compares her failures to her mother's success. He redirects her grief into research, into duty, into anything except the space she actually needed to grieve in. She spends her childhood chasing a power that won't come, watched constantly by a father measuring her against a legacy she never asked for. So the irony sits there, ugly and exact. The same man who wanted to be remembered as the king who saved Hyrule built the machines that erased it, and in reaching for that legacy, he erased something else first. His own daughter's right to just be a kid who was scared. One failure text messages the other. A kingdom in ruins is the visible wound. A daughter carrying his disappointment like a second weight on top of Ganon is the one nobody built a monument for. He dies in the castle. Zelda survives, alone, holding back a god for 100 years with nobody to tell her she was doing it right. When Rome finally appears again, it's as a ghost, handing Link a paraglider, calling his own reign a failure, admitting out loud that he wounded both his kingdom and his child. It plays like atonement, and maybe it is one, but watch who's actually in the room. It's Link, not Zelda. The apology gets spoken into the air of a ruined castle with the one person who needed to hear it nowhere nearby. And then he fades. And that's it, that's the whole reunion. But a father at least stayed inside the story he ruined. What about someone who saves two entire worlds and then deliberately smashes the only door between them, choosing exile so complete that not even a ghost of her can return? Midna. She had the one thing Rome never got, a clean, physical, guilt-free way home, and she used it to make sure she could never take it. That is not a sad accident. That is a decision, and it is a lot harder to watch. Start with what she actually was. Midna is the true ruler of the Twilight Realm, not some wandering spirit attached to Link out of convenience. Zant took her throne, cursed her into a small, snarky imp, and left her clinging to life, dependent on Link and the light spirits just to survive one more day. She shows up mocking Hyrule, mocking Link, mocking the entire idea that this backwater kingdom's problems matter to her. Typical deposed royalty behavior, honestly. Then the deal gets more expensive than she signed up for. At the spring, Zant corners them and forces Midna into the light spirit Lanayru's light, a power that should heal but instead tears through her like poison. It nearly kills her outright. Link carries her limp, dying body all the way to Hyrule Castle, where Zelda saves her the only way left, by giving up her own spirit to heal Midna's. Somewhere between the sarcasm and that spring, contempt turned into something she never planned on feeling for either world. That is the part the story rarely sits with. A queen with every reason to hate the people below her ends up nearly dying because of them, then gets saved by one. Ganondorf falls. The curse breaks. Midna stands there restored to her full Twyla form, powerful, regal, finally whole, with a working mirror of Twilight sitting right there as a return ticket home. She could visit, she could stay in contact, she could do what literally every other Zelda farewell sets up as the reward for suffering. She smiles instead, lets one tear fall, and shatters the mirror herself. That single tear does more damage than Zant ever managed. It does not just close a door, it destroys the door, the frame, and the wall around it on purpose with her own power. No epilogue, no secret passage, no sequel hook where she pops back through. The game never confirms what she was thinking in that moment, but the pattern is right there for anyone watching. This was not a forced separation. This was a queen making the calculation Rome never got the chance to make and choosing exile with her eyes open. Rome lost his place in the story and spent 100 years as a ghost refusing to let go of it. Midna had every version of a happy ending sitting in front of her and set it on fire out of what looks a lot like love. Same reward, opposite choice. One clings to the wreckage, one salts the earth so nobody has to, but she chose to leave while she was still whole. What happens to the hero who never got to choose, who saved the world, died anyway, and came back wrong because being forgotten wouldn't even let him rest? The hero's shade. The greatest hero in the entire timeline spent his afterlife as a pile of bones in a field, and nobody came looking for him. That is not a metaphor. In Twilight Princess, players stumble across a skeletal figure with glowing golden eyes haunting howling stone locations across Hyrule, and the game barely explains who he is. He does not introduce himself. He does not tell his story. He just starts teaching Link sword techniques like the Helm Splitter and the Mortal Draw, moves so advanced they border on supernatural, and lets the player figure out the rest. The rest is devastating. Official material and the game's own audio cues confirm exactly who this is. When Child Link plays his ocarina during the howling sequences, the notes match songs from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, songs the hero of time himself would have known. This skeletal warrior is the spirit of the same Link who saved Hyrule from Ganondorf as a child, traveled through time, and then spent Majora's Mask's 3 days trying to save an entirely different world from the moon itself. That hero never got a happy ending. He got erased. His story after Majora's Mask simply stops. Ocarina of Time ends with him returning to childhood and warning Zelda about Ganondorf, and then the timeline just closes the book. No wedding, no knighthood, no mention in any future era's history books. This ghost, wandering afield centuries later, is the only glimpse anyone ever gets of what happened to him. And what happened to him is that he needed someone to carry on what he did, and nobody ever did. Every technique he teaches Link, he learned by saving the world and then never being asked to demonstrate it again. He calls Link my child in Hylian, and when he finally finishes training him, he does not talk about defeating evil or protecting the kingdom. He expresses relief, pure, simple relief, that his skills will not vanish with him. That is the confession of a man who spent his death terrified of disappearing completely. Think about the king who feared history, writing him as a failure. Think about the guardian exiled from her own home for keeping a promise. Now look at the one who actually beat the odds, actually saved everyone, twice, and still ended up alone in a field with nobody to tell. When the hero's shade finally salutes Link and fades into that spectral light, there is no reunion waiting for him, no family, no monument. He gets one moment of mattering again, and then he is gone. And the game does not pretend that is a happy ending. It is the closest thing to peace he ever finds, and it still looks unbearably lonely. But every single one of them, the king, the exile, the bones in the field, is haunted, because they needed the world to remember what they gave. So what would it look like if someone gave just as much and simply didn't need the credit at all? Groose. Every other name in this video needed a monument. Groose is the only one who built the weapon that won a war and then walked away without asking for one. That is not a small difference. That is the whole video flipped on its head. Start with who he was supposed to be. Skyward Sword introduces Groose as a walking joke. A pompadoured bully at Skyloft's Knight Academy who shoves Link into walls and moons over Zelda like she owes him something. Comic relief. The guy you laugh at, not the guy the legend remembers. And then Zelda falls to the surface, and something nobody expected happens. Groose breaks. He sits alone on the Loftwing platform and cries, admitting out loud that he feels useless next to Link, that he has spent his whole life being the loudest person in the room, and none of it matters now. Zelda games do not usually let a side character say the quiet part that clearly. Groose does. Then he goes to the surface anyway. He names the whole land Grooseland, because of course he does, and then quietly does the least Groose thing imaginable. He stays. He teams up with Impa. He builds the Groosinator, a giant catapult he engineers himself with zero magic, zero destiny, zero goddess pointing a finger at him. And that machine is not a gag prop. It fires the boulders that repel the imprisoned again and again at the exact moments Link cannot hold the line alone. Hyrule survives specific battles because Groose showed up with a slingshot the size of a building. He gets no chosen hero title for it, no blessing, no verse in the legend. The credits roll on Link and Zelda, and Groose is a guy standing in the background, smiling. That is where he earns his place next to the golden-eyed ghost teaching secret sword strikes at Howling Stones. The hero of time saved Hyrule and came back as a skeleton in a spectral field, calling a stranger my child because he never got to matter to anyone the first time. Groose saved Hyrule and came back as the happiest man in Skyloft, rebuilding the surface with his own hands, watching Link and Zelda hold hands without a flicker of the jealousy that used to define him. Same sacrifice, same silence from the legend. Completely different ending. The difference was never what they gave up. It's what they needed back for giving it. One needed to be remembered so badly he haunted the world waiting for it. The other let it go, and built a life anyway. Groose is the proof this whole video was circling. Being forgotten was never the tragedy. Needing not to be was. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.